It's Aaron Bowman here, serving as military specialist for Carleton County. I'm going to give you the third part of the Cold War, Canada in the Cold War presentation. So here you can see the rundown and the countdown to the first hydrogen bomb test, Ivy Mike. This test measured 10.4 megatons, 10.4 million tons of HE. President Truman announced this decision to support the development of the hydrogen bomb, a weapon theorized to be hundreds of times more powerful than anything dropped on in the Second World War, any of the atomic bombs. Of course, the two dropped on Japan during the Second World War. Something of this size and magnitude had never before been seen on our planet and with our civilization. Ivy Mike was a stepping stone to something with infamous power, something that had limitless power, harnessing the power of the sun. So that was January 31st, 1950, when they announced this. And of course, 5 months earlier, in 1949, the United States had lost its nuclear supremacy when the Soviet Union successfully tested their first atomic bomb, which was Joe 1, at the site in Kazakhstan. We talked about that. Then several weeks after that, the British and the US intelligence came to the staggering conclusion that German-born Klaus Fuchs, a top-ranking scientist in the US nuclear program, was a spy for the Soviet Union. These two events, and the fact that the Soviets now knew everything that the Americans did about how to build a hydrogen bomb, led Truman to approve a massive funding for the superpower race to complete the world's first super bomb, or what they call the Teller bomb. As he described it in his public announcement on January 31st, 1950. On November 1st, 1952, the United States successfully tested the Mike bomb, which you can see here, the world's first hydrogen bomb, in Eniwetok Atoll in the Pacific Marshall Islands. The 10.4 megaton thermonuclear device built upon the Teller-Ulam principles of stage radiation implosion instantly vaporized an entire island and left behind a crater more than a mile wide. The incredible explosive force of Mike was also apparent from the sheer magnitude of its mushroom cloud. Within 90 seconds, the mushroom cloud climbed to 57,000 feet and entered the stratosphere. And this is how it works here. It's a fission bomb inside a fusion bomb, and it can use a plutonium rod, and it uses tritium fuel to ignite a much larger explosion. That's a simplified example of what I'm saying. 1 minute later, it reached 108,000 feet. So you can see here the chain reaction from it starts with the implosion, and then of course the implosion, the outward blast, and this is the result. So this is eventually stabilizing at a ceiling of 120,000 feet. Half an hour after the test, the mushroom stretched 60 miles across, with the base of the head joining the stem at 45,000 feet. And that's Ivy Mike, 10.4 megatons. This here is a famous photograph of Ivy Mike at its once it's entered the stratosphere, and the blast taking from, of course, this is taken from aircraft measuring radiation and also taking pictures and monitoring the blast, the testing, and of course Air Force pilots. There's some of them just used directly as guinea pigs that would actually were ordered to fly right through the mushroom clouds to measure radiation. Years later, many of these men had cancer, died. Some still alive told their story. All part of the secret testing that had been going on from Bikini Atoll to in Nevada, and from testing sites from New Mexico, and of course from Area 51, the new development testing site for America's stealth weapons program, and such as the U-2 spy plane, such as modern technology and aircraft that could go Mach 3 um, and above, the Y-12. Um, and these developments from Area 51 led to developments like such as the B-2 bomber later on. And of course, this was also part Area 51. There's Area 25 and other areas that were involved in the major nuclear testing that were completely secret for the Department of Energy and EG&G, um, which is of course a part alongside Lockheed Martin in developing top secret technology within the CIA and also linked within the CIA as well. Um, and of course, the push for this technology and the development of this technology was the threat of communism and the spread of communism, and the fact that America did not have the total monopoly over nuclear weapons anymore. Um, Here you can see some of the early nuclear tests, um, and of course, later developing weapons. The biggest nuclear test was actually done by the Soviet Union in 1961, and we'll get to that. That was Tsar Bomba, 57 megatons. Here's another diagram of the Teller design, or thermonuclear device. The primary detonator is a small atom bomb used to generate a high energy neutrons and thermal pressure here, and then a beryllium neutron reflecting liner here. Um, the fission primary detonation releases X-rays, whatnot. X-rays and neutrons which are reflected off the beryllium lining and causes the styrofoam to form a plasma, and and of course this plasma and neutrons and X-rays then compress the uranium cylinder, causing the lithium deuteride to begin a fusion reaction. And the plutonium core, the rod you see here, also compresses and ignites the lithium deuteride from the center of the cylinder by a fission reaction. And this is uranium 328. It's the uranium 328 cylinder, and of course it's styrofoam. Um, Lithium deuteride is in here, a dry powder containing lithium and deuterium. Um, this is the actual fuel that will create the fusion, and the lithium will absorb a neutron and transform to tritium. Then the tritium and deuterium will fuse to form helium and a free neutron, releasing energy and then eventually creating hydrogen, and it thus be calling it the hydrogen bomb. Um, Once the above reaction is initiated with a neutron, the result yields helium um, energy and another free neutron to keep the reaction growing, and then eventually, and that leads to the release of hydrogen. Like the U.S., the Russians, the Soviet Union continued testing nuclear weapons as well. But it wasn't until 1953 when they had their first hydrogen bomb test. Well, I wouldn't call it a true hydrogen bomb test, but the first the first test of the first hydrogen bomb, RDS-6, the sixth nuclear test. RDS-1 being the first atomic bomb. RDS-6 is the first test of the first Soviet hydrogen bomb. This took place on August 12, 1953. Nicknamed Joe 4 by the Americans, it used a layer cake design of fission and fusion fuels, uranium-235 and lithium-6 deuteride, and produced a yield of about 400 kilotons. This yield was about 10 times more powerful than any previous Soviet test. When developing higher level bombs, the Soviets proceeded with the RDS-6 as their main effort instead of the analog RDS-7 advanced fission bomb test. fission bomb. This led to the third idea bomb, which is called the RDS-37, which actually becomes the first airdropped thermonuclear device. This is the beginning of course, um, more tests, higher yield development, um, and technological developments, including delivery systems. The Soviets, and I'll explain what RDS-37 here is soon, was the world's first airdropped hydrogen bomb, which is actually designed, delivered 5 to 6 months before the Americans. And the Americans, about 5 to 6 months later, dropped their first hydrogen bomb on a bomber. So this was a compact design that could actually fit inside the bomb bay of a bomber, and that was the first one of its kind. This is a simulated test of a 10 megaton hydrogen bomb. I think this is Ivy Mike here, but this is just a simulation of what the blast is far more intense with a 10 megaton blast. Your retinas, if you look in the direction of the blast, your retinas, if you're looking at the initial flash, you're blinded. Your retinas are melted 90 kilometers, 90 miles away. 90 miles away. Can you imagine? People blinded um, over 6 to 7 to 10 miles square mile, not square miles, circumference around of complete utter devastation. Um, the massive heavy damage from everything being vaporized within that radius, and beyond those points, to 10 to 15 miles, it's third degree burns. Um, it is heavy damage to buildings, and onward. Tested this bomb, RDS-37, in it was November 1955, November 22nd. The weapon had a yield of roughly 1.6 megatons. And that, of course, the founding factors of this design, of course, the Americans did the Castle Bravo test. The Soviet scientists started to search for ways to make an effective large yield thermonuclear bomb. Um, After a lot of intensive research of past experience with these bombs, a new two-stage bomb was devised, and of course, this was the first airdrop thermonuclear weapon in the world. About 5 to 6 months before the Americans even had an airdropped thermonuclear weapon. And of course, this being that's a major step forward. The Americans are um, just behind, just a tad, on the compact nature of the hydrogen bomb. And of course, many people question whether they could be successful from the very beginning with this design. Questions concerning a two-stage nuclear charge fell into two categories. The first set of questions concerning the nuclear implosion, the first module or fission trigger initiated by compression of nuclear material, or fission and fusion of materials by spherical explosion of chemical explosives, in which the spherical symmetry of the implosion was directed by the initial spherically um, symmetric detonation of explosives. So, how it was designed. Of course, this bomb led to the real threat that, of course, the Soviets could drop a hydrogen bomb on American and Canadian cities with bombers coming over the pole. They dropped this bomb, I believe it was with a Tu-4, um, no, Tu-16 actually. The Tu-16A was, of course, a new designed bomber, torpedo bomber, that was actually a medium range strategic bomber, able to carry just one of these bombs. And of course, Um, this is the one of the major bombers that was had a threat of being used over the North Pole as part of the Soviet strategic bomber forces. The Tu-16, of course, it was a new bomber, the Badger. The code name, it's a NATO code name of Badger. It was a swept wing, and had two large McCoolin AM3 turbojets, one under each wing. It could carry a single massive 20,000 um, Fab 9,000 20,000 pound conventional bomb, the Russian equivalent of the British Grand Slam bomb, or various nuclear weapons for a range of about 4,800 to about roughly 3,000 miles. Of course, it was produced in three plants. This was the first major, one of the first major early bombers to be able to carry nuclear weapons in a strategic role. The first one being Tu-4 Bull, then there's the M4 Bison, and after the M4 Bison, the Tu-95 Bearer bomber, and that is the longest was the longest range bomber of the three. Tu-16, it began as a high altitude free fall bomber in the mid 1950s. It was equipped to carry Soviet cruise missiles even. Um, the Tu-16 KS-1 Badger B could carry the AS-1 missiles over a combat radius of 1,800 kilometers, 1,100 miles. So it's a very real threat to the Western and NATO allies. Certainly is very capable. So you can see here where the Soviets um, could come over the pole. Here, the distance early warning line would pick them up. And of course, we had fighters in the mid-level, even at Goose Bay, CFB Goose Bay, and up in northern Canada to intercept them. And that threat was ever more real when Sputnik in 1957 had been shot up when the Age of Missile began. Age of Missile. And then, of course, we have the Pine Tree Line, which is along down here. We have more fighters, more capable assets. And, of course, the Americans and their fighters and assets alongside to help shoot them down. So some of this you guys already know in the other Cold War presentations I did, of course. Um, so Canada would continue to supply fissionable material to the U.S. and other allies throughout the Cold War, although Canada never developed indigenous nuclear weapons as did NATO allies France and the United Kingdom. Of course, after briefly allowing nuclear weapons to be temporarily stationed in Goose Bay, Labrador, Canada agreed to a long-term lease of the Goose Bay base to the U.S. Strategic Command. The Americans were refused permission to stockpile bomb casings for the B-36 at Goose Bay. These bombs would have been armed in wartime with materials brought from the United States. Goose Bay was used as a base for air refueling tankers, which were to support the Strategic Air Command B-47 and then B-52 bomber forces. Of course, so here is a picture of, I believe it's F-84 Sabres, Thunderjets. And of course, these here were stationed there. This is a picture from the Berlin crisis, actually. Um, this other picture that you see here is a B-36 bomber. Of what I'm talking about there, that they carry the B-41 high yield thermonuclear warhead, Mark 41, a bunch of different weapons, hydrogen bombs, early developed thermonuclear weapons that were the early airdropped U.S. designs. One of them being Mark 41. It carried 87,200 pounds of conventional or nuclear ordnance. It was, of course, it had 16,000 kilometer range. Carried second generation nuclear weapons. first and second generation bombs, Mark 5, Mark 4, and then of course Mark 41, and then other designs, uh, MK17 is another thermonuclear design. That bomb had a yield of about 15 megatons, and so here, so they refused, of course, those, but they actually did end up having nuclear weapons. Well, they had nuclear weapons at Goose Bay for in a number of years, more than what people would regularly know. So in here is the cat badge of the Fifth Wing at Goose Bay, and that's of course the Canadian and U.S. Forces there. Here is where they believe, of course, they're from the map I've read on here. Um, so they even were prepared to have like the Bombard Missile system. So this is missile assembly checkout building, munition storage one, two, three here, and numerous. These are munition storage and including nuclear weapons storage areas. Um, so and of course, so it's saying it has the impression that most Canadians are not aware of the extent that American military forces were deployed at U.S. bases located within Canadian borders throughout the Cold War, including Chatham, at CFB Chatham in New Brunswick here. Yeah. Genie air-to-air missiles. I think it was with the CF-101s. I'll double check on that. CF-101s. Of course, the early fighters we had that were early jet fighters. We had the CF-100, CF-101, and then the CF-104, and then the development of the CF-105, which is the Avro Arrow in 1956, 1957, and I will get to more of that later. This person writing this blog about CFB Goose Bay said, I'm convinced that there were nuclear weapons forward deployed in Canada at Goose Air Base by the Americans as part of their Cold War footing that have never been disclosed. So, did the Canadian government know? Did they look the other way? I'll show you how this is more than a small detail and not for political reasons. So this is a believed to be a nuclear weapons storage area. So this person writing, let me set up for you the background and give you some information I think you should know. Starting World War II, there were, of course, was an American presence in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, as it was used as a critical transport route to Europe, of course. And that's, of course, fueling KC-135 bombers, or KC-135 fueling tankers that are meant to refuel American bombers, B-47 and B-52 bombers. A stopover to refuel before going across the Atlantic. Between July 1950 and November 1950, Americans forward deployed Boeing B-50 heavy bombers and Mark IV nuclear weapons to Goose Bay Air Base. This nuclear bomb deployment is an element of Canadian history and is a fact. Normally, the American government doesn't disclose any information about where their nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons are located, but they needed to divulge it through diplomatic channels to the Canadian government at the time, since one of their bombers ran into engine trouble on the way back and had to jettison and conventionally detonate an unarmed nuclear weapon. And that was, I believe it probably was a Mark IV, potentially contaminating the St. Lawrence near Rivière-du-Loup. Whoops, yeah, of course, that is a major problem. This only became public knowledge in the 1980s, as no fissile pit was installed in the bomb when it was detonated. It is unclear to me of any highly enriched uranium that was in the hull of the bomb, and if it would have been dispersed into the food chain of the St. Lawrence River. Let's hope not. But that is a Mark IV there. It's a Mark IV nuclear weapon. Here's the B-50. Here's the what we call the Boeing B50 Bomber. Of course, the first bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was carried by, of course, the Enola Gay and its sister, um, which were B-29 Stratofortress bombers. The B-50 is an extended variant of that, longer range, more capable. Um, and of course, then they developed the B-36, which is longer range, and then B-47 jet bombers, and then the B-52, which is still in service today in a much more modern capacity. Um, so, in 1951, the Pine Tree Line the construction commenced as a joint Canada-U.S. project. Early warning stations were placed to counter the Soviet air threat against North America, right? So, and this later became part of the U.S. Canada North American Air Defense Command, a NORAD system. Here's the CF-100s right here. So initially, the radar stations were fully manual air defense systems with both aircraft control and early warning stations. So with these fully early warning stations, they had the flexibility of being able to see incoming targets, incoming threats. The stations were organized into geographical sectors. In 1954, it was decided to partly automate, the Pine Tree system and this semi-automatic ground environment SAGE system was introduced. This system was introduced in the early 1960s and utilized computers to do routine functions while retaining human decision making. In 1957, there were 39 Pine Tree sites. Of course, NORAD, as I mentioned about NORAD was established in 1957, but it was not until the 12th of May 1958 that Canada and the United States signed the North American Air Defense NORAD Command Agreement to coordinate the defense of North America. In 1958, the semi-automatic ground environment system, SAGE, was added to the system. By the mid-1960s, the Pine Tree Line consisted of 4 administrative groupings of stations. Group 1, sites funded and manned by the USAF and located in the Goose sector. Group 2, sites were funded by the USAF and manned by RCAF, Royal Canadian Air Force. Group 3, sites other than Group 1 funded and manned by USAF. And, of course, Group 4, sites funded and manned by RCAF. So, 4 groups. So in the 1960 period, Canadian Pine Tree upgrades the CADN, or what we call CADN Pine Tree upgrades, involved establishment of Combat Direction Center in the Ottawa Air Defense Sector (ADS). SAGE tie-in of 25 existing radars of the Pine Tree Line Goose NORAD sector remained a manual system and was not included in the upgrade. Establishment of 7 new heavy radars in Canada and SAGE tie-in. Establishment of 45 gap filler radars in Canada and SAGE tie-in. 35 RCAF responsibility and 10 USAF responsibility. Construction and provision for essential ancillary equipment and establishment of 2 Bombard Missile sites in Canada. La Marquesa and North Bay. In 1979, the older tube technology computer system in North Bay was replaced by 900 pounds of new technology replaced 350 tons of the old computer equipment. Amazing. In 1981, in a further realignment of stations in Western Canada commenced reporting to North Bay rather than to previous American sector stations. In 1985, the new North warning system became operational. It comprised 13 long-range radar sites, 11 in Canada, of which 8 were old sites and 39 short-range radar sites, 26 in Canada. Portions of the Pine Tree system were incorporated into the new North Warning System. Amazing undertaking for the largest radar systems for NORAD. So here's Goose Bay, and here's more of the ground storage magazines, 3 storage magazines for weapons, earth-covered magazines, and of course some of these are nuclear munition storage um, for the Mark IV bombs, for the B50s. Um, so this is just a satellite image of it more further back, and then further back again you can see exactly where it is, like Melville, North West River, and you can see exactly where it is in that's CFB Goose Bay right there. So there's us, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland, Labrador, Prince Edward Island there. And so you can see in conjunction where it is from Greenland is as far as, and then up north, so so officially, those Mark IV nuclear bombs were the only offensive nuclear weapons ever deployed in Canada. Offensive is a term used referring to bombs, cruise missiles, ICBMs, of course, nuclear weapons that would be used in a nuclear strike on a foreign country. Since Bombard missiles were defensive, along with Lulu depth charges, Falcon air-to-air missiles, and Genie air-to-air missiles, rockets, which are nuclear equipped. Genie and Falcon can be. The Canadian government seemed to have the moral high ground defending Canada, even with nuclear weapons, was perfectly palatable for the electorate. And this is another B-50 bomber here. So where exactly at Goose Bay did they keep their nuclear weapons in 1950? According to John Clearwater, they were in the forest under heavy guard and away from prying eyes. I believe that would mean they were northwest of the Goose Air Base runways, west of the hospital and graveyard. Why would I think that? Well, the military does a lot of planning and they have a lot of standards they need to adhere to when it comes to building construction. They won't just pick any location to store nuclear weapons. They're most expensive and secret weapons. Physically, the physical security would demand multiple barbed wire fences, guard dogs, a kennel for dogs, guardhouses, road ringing the area to patrol the perimeter, and so forth. These construction standards are well documented and evolved over time. And of course, with U.S. nuclear weapons in other countries, U.S. Marines such as nuclear weapons in Turkey are America's B-61s in Turkey, and so forth. They have a Marine unit there guarding them, and of course, those Marines are not allowed to let anybody pass unless they have the proper clearances. Um, Vintage site plans show guard houses, double fences, the kennel, and 4 rectangles that look very much like hard stands or foundations for buildings which would have stored Mark IV nuclear bombs in that large square fence location at the northwest of the end of the base. That's at CFB Goose Bay in Newfoundland, or in so being way up in Labrador, it's very cold up there, of course, too. I've illustrated on a Canadian topo map from atlas.gc.ca with a yellow circle that where that was. Documentation isn't clear which buildings were built first in this special storage area, but a storage facility was given the approval to be built in 1951. Documents show it had already been started by the USAF in 1950 as a makeshift staging area that was rushed into production. The yellow area circled on the map probably wasn't constructed to the standards that the military would want for long-term storage and maintenance of nuclear weapons. So you see here These are hardened structures for storing nuclear weapons. Between 1953 and 1954, 10 new reinforced concrete buildings were built by the Americans at the new Goose Air Base weapons storage area at the southeast end of the base, surrounded by two barbed wire fences with winterized armed guard towers, shown on the map with a blue circle, and I think that was in the map there. Um, this would be the only weapons storage area in Canada to have such high security, which for the time was quite notable. No other ammunition storage facility elsewhere on the base, or any base in Canada, had such physical security measures in place. High double barbed wire fences, dogs, guard towers, etc. Military strategy wise, at that time, the plan was to forward deploy and store nuclear weapons away from continental US bases where the Soviets' new nuclear weapons were stored, and would make easy targets in an initial Soviet nuclear strike. By forward deploying nuclear weapons, the US also intended to shorten the time it would take to launch an attack or counterattack with bombers and have a shorter distance to go to the Soviet Union. Um, First major targets, of course, being before ICBMs and ballistic missiles, it was cities and of course other air bases and naval bases. And then of course with the development of ballistic missiles, nuclear submarines, the first nuclear attack submarine being deployed in 1954 called USS Nautilus. These were the main strategies, right? I mean, and taking out early warning, major cities, whatnot. Another indication, and this is just some. This video here is just some of Canadian. This is a video of Canadian Forces Base, CFB Goose Bay. This is just a general video showing some of the construction and aircraft. Another indication this weapons storage area was intended to be used as nuclear weapons storage area is the design of the buildings. Fissile pits were stored in one type of building. The non-nuclear bulk of the bomb was stored in another. So here we have U.S. Air Force F-89 fighter aircraft, what you see here. So there would be a plant building where maintenance and assembly would take place. We all have three of those types of buildings present in exact same configuration as can be found at the Spanish and Moroccan former Strategic Air Command bases where nuclear weapons are known to have been stored, as in Morocco and in Spain. So we're going to talk about the Tu-95, the Tu-95 bomber system. Here's Nikita Khrushchev here. The Tu-95 is bomber the Soviets were developing, and certainly was initially it comes out in its planning phases in 1952, and so by 1958 it's in 54 55 it is available and it is deployed and able to launch over, if need be, with hydrogen bombs over the west and east coast of the United States and Canada, over the North Pole. There's a Delta Dart U.S. fighter there. For a long time, of course, it was known to U.S. NATO intelligence as Tu-20. Well, this was the original Soviet Air Force designation for the aircraft. By the time it was being supplied to operational units, it was already better known as the Tu-95 bearer. So the Tu-20 designation quickly fell out of use in the Soviet Union. So this is one of their biggest, and it's a dual turboprop aircraft. So it has counter-rotating blades. It can carry a heavy bomb load of nuclear ordnance, and then today it is equipped. The new Tu-95 MS and MSM can carry cruise missiles that have a 2,000-mile range. They evaluated the maximum speed for this aircraft, and the U.S. Department of Defense did at roughly 640 kilometers per hour, with a range of 12,500 kilometers, 7,800 miles. These numbers had to be revised upward numerous times because it is capable. It is the Russian variant of the B-52. a turboprop variant, very agile and capable. And it is the second, if not the first, oldest in-service aircraft as a bomber in the world. Um, like its American counterpart, the B-52, the Tu-95 continued to operate into the Russian Air Force and still is today. Um, and so certainly it was and it still is a major threat. It still is no joke to this day. Very capable, um, and at the time it was their most capable long-range bomber, able to drop hydrogen bombs on Canadian and American cities and air bases. And of course, onward, the development of cruise missiles. It still maintained throughout the Cold War a strategic asset of the Soviet Air Force bomber nuclear strike force. So it was a major part of the bomber triad. Even today, it is still part of the Russian strategic nuclear forces triad of strategic aircraft, along with the Tu-160, Tu-22M, three backfire bombers. Is still in today. It's much more modernized. Throughout the Cold War, Soviet bombers would, in a sense, dip into our airspace just a little bit, and we would send fighters to escort them out. U.S. or Canadians, British, as well as other countries, even from Norway, many countries would have, well, mainly the U.S. and Canada would have to send in fighters to force them to turn around. They would do this just as an intimidation tactic. The U.S. would do it too against Soviet airspace, but we would have to go up because they would one bomber or two would penetrate just into our airspace, and we would have to go up and turn them around. And they're doing that today. The Russians have been doing that today and are still doing it with these bombers and more upgraded variants. You can see here F-4 Phantoms having to go up and turn them around. They can drop nuclear weapons at 50,000 feet. They are incredibly long range um, and can stay up for a very long period of time. There's a naval variant, which is Tu-142, which is a maritime anti-submarine patrol aircraft equipped with torpedoes and depth bombs and whatnot, sensors. Um, but the Bear A and the Bear B were the first ones in development for dropping nuclear weapons and onward. Um, Such as the Tu-16. I've mentioned the Tu-16 is also a major factor in this. So the Bear, the Bison, and the Badger. The Badger, Tu-16 Badger, the M4 Bison, which is another slower jet variant, and then a jet version of its own, strategic bomber, and then the Tu-95 comes out as certainly the longest range. So this is Cam 4, Belly Bay, 1961. This is one of the early warning sites. I think it is the Pine Tree Line. It's the distant early warning line. So it's up further up than that. Um, they are at guard all the time, watching for um, signs of aircraft or ballistic missile launch. Later on, the development of more technology try um, to detect ballistic missiles and the plumes of ballistic missiles by launch, um, and the heat trails from ballistic missile launches from silos, which of course would be coming from satellites and the development of satellite early warning systems as well. Um, my grandfather, Percy Connors, served in one of these I believe it was the Pine Tree Line. Served for a year up north as one of the radar technicians. Yeah, and so that's my grandfather, Percy Connors. Unfortunately, he died. He served 32 years Air Force Navy. Um, and he he unfortunately died last March in 2020. That's my grandfather there. Very proud of him. He did well, served well in the Navy and in the Royal Canadian Air Force. So here's our once again here's our president, Louis St. Laurent, Prime Minister of Canada, 1948 to 1957. More on the Warsaw Pact here, of course, just for a few minutes. So the Warsaw Pact, otherwise known as the Warsaw Treaty Organization, was supposed to be an alliance which created a centralized military command in Europe and Eastern Europe during the Cold War. But in practice, it was dominated by the USSR. So that's the Poland, the Polish, of course, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania, sort of. And of course, Czechoslovakia was an independent communist country for um, a while, and then of course Tito in Yugoslavia. Some of this I've already talked about before, um, and did so of course dominated by the USSR and did mostly what the USSR, the Soviet Union, told it to do. Political ties were to be centralized, too, created by the Warsaw Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance, a typically false piece of Soviet naming. The pact was, in the short term, a reaction to the admittance of West Germany to NATO, which they finally joined NATO. And um, of course, the West German army created and founded finally because after the Second World War, Germany was not allowed to have an army. The occupying forces, of course, the United States, um, France, Great Britain, and then, of course, Canada. And so these countries, that was the force of West Germany. But then in 1955, the Bundeswehr was created on November 12th, 1955. And of course, that's because the USSR, of course, was raising its own smaller armies, colonized armies. In that kind of context, satellite states within the Warsaw Pact, um, of course. So, cooperation and mutual assistance, a typically false piece of Soviet naming. And the pact was, in the short term, a reaction to the admittance of the West Germany, of course, going into NATO. And this was then the Soviet Union responded to creating what we call the Warsaw Pact. In the long term, the Warsaw Pact was both designed to partly mimic and counter NATO, strengthen Russian control over its satellite states, and boost Russian power in diplomacy. NATO and the Warsaw Pact never fought a physical war in Europe and used proxies elsewhere in the world, and that's Korea, of course, Indochina, so then Vietnam, um, certainly Angola, Cuba. Um, talk a little bit about Cuba, South America, and certainly this is throughout the world. Why was the Warsaw Pact necessary? The Second World War has seen a temporary change in the previous decades of diplomacy when Soviet Russia was at loggerhead with the democratic West. So they were, of course, going head to head, right? In the Second World War, it was a temporary change. Before that, it was, of course, communism versus the West, even before the Second World War, since 1917, since the Bolsheviks took power in the Soviet Union. After the revolutions in 1917 removed the Tsar, communist Russia never got on very well with Britain and France and others who feared it. Of course, and that was from good reason. I mean, but Hitler's invasion of the USSR didn't just doom his empire. It caused the West, including the United States, to ally with the Soviets in order to destroy Hitler, and that was certainly true. One of the biggest mistakes ever made by Adolf Hitler. Nazi forces had reached deep into Russia and almost to Moscow, and Soviet forces fought all the way to Berlin before the Nazis were defeated and Germany surrendered. Then the alliance fell apart. Stalin's USSR, the Soviet Union, now had its military spread across Eastern Europe, and he decided to keep control, creating what was, in effect, communist client states who would do what the USSR and the Soviet Union told them. There was opposition, and it didn't go smoothly. But overall, Eastern Europe became a communist-dominated bloc. Uh, the democratic nations of the West ended the war in an alliance which was worried about Soviet expansion, and they turned their military alliance into a new form, and then NATO, and of course, and so with response to NATO and the and West Germany going into NATO, East Germany was to go into the Warsaw Pact, along with Poland, Romania, Hungary, the Czechoslovakia eventually, and the Eastern European states. And they were Soviet trained, Soviet equipped, and Soviet armed. The Soviet Union maneuvered around the threat of a Western alliance, making proposals for European alliances which would include both the West and the Soviets. They even applied to become members of NATO. The West, fearing that this was simply negotiating tactics with a hidden agenda and wishing NATO to represent the freedom the Soviet Union was seen to oppose, rejected it. It was perhaps inevitable that the USSR would organize a formal rival military alliance, and the Warsaw Pact was it. The pact acted as one of the two key power blocs in the Cold War, during which pact troops operating under the Brezhnev Doctrine occupied and ensured compliance with Russia against member states. The Brezhnev Doctrine was basically a rule that allowed pact forces, mostly Russian forces, to police member states and keep them communist puppets. And that was certainly in force in 1956. It was certainly true in 1956 with the Hungarian Revolution in Budapest. Now, talking about that, certainly they call it the Hungarian Revolution of 1956 or Hungarian Uprising. Of course, it was nationwide, but it was led directly in Budapest against the Hungarian People's Republic and its Soviet imposed policies, lasting from the 23rd of October until the 10th of November 1956. It was leaderless at the beginning. It was the first major threat to Soviet control since the Red Army drove Nazi Germany from its territory at the end of the Second World War. So there you go. That's one major uprising that the Soviet army crushed, eventually coming in there and destroying them. Well, their leader was executed, and then it is again Soviet rule was imposed. So, and the Brezhnev Doctrine was certainly a part of that kind of doctrine, that sledgehammer power throw. The Warsaw Pact agreement called for the integrity of sovereign states, but this was never likely. So, in the mid 50s, going into the 60s, of course, you have more development of. First, the Soviets were ahead in the space race. They developed the first ICBM, SS-6 Sapwood, which launched the first satellite into orbit, which in 1957 was Sputnik. They also were developing medium-range ballistic missiles, much like the West was. Of course, first SS2, SS1, SS2, SS3, SS4, SS4 Sandel, and SS5 Skin were the weapons that were put in Eastern Europe that had a 3,000-mile range, 6-minute flight, and a 3-megaton hydrogen bomb at the tip of it. And of course, these were developed in the late 50s, early 60s. And so these were the missiles that were deployed in Cuba in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The weapon systems that the West was developing, first, of course, after the launch of Sputnik, and this is Sputnik here. This is the first ever satellite put into orbit. In 1957, of course, it startled the Americans. Eisenhower, and then of course after that was startled. Eisenhower was startled as well as the American people, but of course he didn't show that. As you can see here, he says that so far that as the satellite itself is concerned, that does not raise my apprehensions. And of course, this being said, Eisenhower said that this was, of course, a scientific achievement. With that said, he tried to convince the American people there was nothing to fear. But of course, with the age of missile, he was not successful in getting them to um, not be fearful in a sense. Of course, at this time, America's testing hydrogen bombs. The Soviet Union is testing hydrogen bombs. This is continuing on. The threat is, of course, total annihilation in a world where nuclear weapons were the new key subject in the playing field. And this is, of course, they knew that atop that missile could be a thermonuclear warhead. R7 was the world's first true ICBM that could actually fly, of course, shoot out into space and then enter the atmosphere um, and deliver a nuclear warhead. This time it delivered a satellite into space. Soon after, they launched Laika, the first actual animal in space. Um, so this dog maybe lived for 2 weeks, whatnot. But that was the next step. And of course, U.S. Navy responds. The U.S. Navy responds with the Vanguard rocket, but that fails. But of course, a man named Wernher von Braun, who was in charge of the U.S. Missile program for the U.S. military, Redstone being another design of rocket for the U.S. military, designed by Wernher von Braun and his team, was the game changer where America finally reached space with the Redstone. And the Redstone, of course, was a development, and then of course there were other derivatives, and then of course the Air Force's SM-65 Atlas is a derivative of the Army Ballistic Missile Agency's SSMA-14 Redstone. Was of course development of America's first ICBM developed with the Air Force. So, and of course, they developed at that time the Americans were developing Atlas, Thor, a theta range ballistic missile, and of course Minuteman I, and Atlas 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Um, Minuteman 1 and 2, very successful. We today still have the Minuteman 3s. Minuteman 3G, I think it is. 440 of those in inventory. It actually might be down to 400. I have to double check, but this here is some of the Sputnik. This is the R7. This is in Baikonur. It's some footage of the R7 in its first flights. And Baikonur is the major Soviet rocket test site and space launch site in Kazakhstan. And Baikonur is still used today. The Russians, that's their facility. They still use it today. In Kazakhstan, an SSR state at the time, was part of the Soviet Empire, of course. The Soviets might have been, say, ahead of the Americans in the space race for a while, but the Americans had the number superiority of missiles soon after. 1959, there was the missile gap was in America's favor. The R7 has an effective firing range of about 8,800 kilometers. So 5,500 miles. I mean, and of course, it could carry a 3 to 5 megaton thermonuclear warhead. Um, it had two stages. So when a ballistic missile, what you see here, launches into outer space in its boost phase, what we call the boost phase, um, once it's in orbit, it ejects the first stage. Another stage ignites. And with ballistic missile today, there's 3 or 4 stages. Um, and then you have what we call the mid-course phase. And then, so as you're, and what you have, long story short, once you start coming in to the warhead starts re-entering the atmosphere, that is what we call the terminal phase. And the terminal phase is where the warhead is re-entering it. It's either going to hit a city or a military target. And, and so you can see there. Um, and if you've seen Apollo 13, you'll know what I'm talking about. It works the same way. Is you're trying to get a warhead or a satellite or Apollo into orbit. This is what they were doing. This is how to do it. You know, certainly ballistic missiles were the step of the future because you can take out a target within launch of 30 minutes. And a single thermonuclear warhead that was carried on this, 3 megatons, um, enough to wipe out uh, 5 to 6 million people, maybe 7 to 8 million people in a city the size of New York within milliseconds. Um, in the range of a thermonuclear blast, as I've talked about before, the incredible power of that. Um, the people that have seen tests, been a part of tests like Castle Bravo, which was it was a very dirty thermonuclear bomb detonation. It just keeps getting hotter and hotter. It's like, you can almost see through yourself like an X-ray. And this is um, 20 miles away. This is, uh, it's incredible the amount of force that's behind that. Um, the end of humanity was in the hands of very few people for 40, 50 years, and it still is today for 60 years. And today, it's that in a sense remains that same on that level of concept. So for Canada to be able to be part of NATO, to develop, to have the capability to fight against Soviet bombers, which is a major threat that has been ongoing, and then with the new development of ballistic missiles, the only thing that really would deter a ballistic missile strike is ballistic missiles from the other side. Deterrence. Missile defense really had never been thoroughly developed. I mean, ballistic missiles were new. I mean, but fighters, of course, fighters like the CF-100, which you see here, the first prototype coming out in 1950. Um, so, of course, you have Avro, which develops the CF-100 Canuck, which is a frontline fighter throughout the 1950s. Um, and then there's the CF-101. CF-100 is principally served in the Royal Canadian Air Force. It also was procured in even small numbers in Belgium. Um, of course, amid the Cold War, the CF-100 was typically deployed at both NATO air bases in Europe and in North America as part of the NORAD operation. Um, so in addition to the types used in the frontline squadron, it was also supplied to operational um, squadrons. And of course, these are new experimental aircraft CF-103. Um, it was included in different roles, aerial reconnaissance, electronic warfare roles, and then of course the CF-103, an advanced derivative of the CF-100, was adopted a swept wing design. It was capable of transonic speeds. And of course, further development of these concepts led to what we have one of the most famous fighters in the world, the development by Avro, which was the CF-105. There was nothing quite like her. And I honestly say that because I mean I built a model of it, and it's absolutely it's unbelievable. So one of the most famous aircraft in Canadian history, of course, first one being Aero 201. It never made it to operational use, but it was more capable than anything the Russians or the Americans could come up with at the time. This was a delta wing design, supersonic, which is what we wanted, which is what we needed for be able to carry. The development began in 1956 and finally in 55 and onward, 56, and then first flight being in 1958, um, was supersonic. If it was fitted with an Iroquois engine, which overall the later variants were, but then of course all models were scrapped, it would have had a speed, and it did have a speed of Mach 2.5. Absolutely unheard of for a fighter. If it was equipped with a Genie air-to-air nuclear missile, it could take out Soviet bombers just as they were over the pole. We could reach them. Um, it would have been something that the Russians would be truly scared of. It was an all-weather design, two-seat interceptor designed and produced by, of course, Avro Aircraft Limited, and that was in Malton, Ontario. Um, Avro had avoided the normal prototype stage and launched directly into manufacture of production of aircraft. They had to invent um, systems to create this design. They had to invent the technology to build the design. It was very much overpriced, but it was very much worth it. And I wish they had not canceled it. Um, the six aircraft, of course, the five production standard aircraft were outfitted with the J57 aircraft engines and flight systems, so they were able to go to Mach 2. Um, the sixth aircraft was equipped with the full production of Orenda Iroquois engines, but this aircraft never flew before the program was canceled. A total of 31 aircraft, more aircraft were also in production when the entire effort was terminated by the federal government on the February 20th, 1959. Mark 1 had the J57, and Mark 2 had the Orenda Iroquois engines. They would have been able to go to Mach 2.5. We would have gotten orders from all over NATO, certainly the United States and whatnot. The Americans didn't want us to have it because, I mean, in a sense, it was stealing because they were the bigger power. It was kind of, in a sense, a smaller country developing something revolutionary that America should be developing. And Aero Design, and a lot of these guys went to Lockheed Martin, um, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and they developed the F-106 Delta Dart, which is another Delta wing derivative coming from the design of the Avro Aero. I mean, it was, and so it was another high-speed interceptor, but it is the most, pretty much the most famous Canadian designed aircraft in the world. Um, there is just recently they found one of the flight model prototypes that was in Lake Superior or one of the Great Lakes, and it was in pretty bad shape. But they found it. They've been looking for it, and they found it, and it's incredible design. Um, they needed a design that had certainly much decreased drag and equipped for long range air to air combat. It was faster than anything that any other country had developed at the time, except for one, which was classified top secret, which was the Y-12 reconnaissance aircraft, which was in development at Area 51. Um, but this, for the frontline combat aircraft, there's no question. It was the best at the time. In today's standards, it would be still, if they made a Mark III, which I think they should, it would be still one of the best capable combat aircraft. Um, and this was developed certainly by the threat that the Soviets could drop nuclear bombs in our cities and air bases. You know, We had targets in the Maritimes. We had targets all over Canada, as well as the United States. Loring Air Force Base, which is a SAC, Strategic Air Command base, which carried B-52s, thermonuclear weapons at all times, heated runway, already at all times. They are ready to launch at a moment's notice. They were, and that's roughly about 90 miles from Woodstock, New Brunswick, where we are. So, and it goes to show you how serious the threat is, certainly. So 1952, of course, the British developed their first atomic bomb, and they tested it. A plutonium implosion device detonated on October 3rd, 1952, in the lagoon in the Montebello Islands in Western Australia. With the success of Operation Hurricane, Britain became the third nuclear power after the United States and the Soviet Union. So, in yield roughly about 25 kilotons. And that was the first test. So now Great Britain has the bomb. And then as soon it will spread, France will have the bomb. And Communist China will have the bomb. But that's not until 1964. And so this is the first atomic bomb test of Great Britain. Blue Jerboa was the code name of the first French nuclear test conducted by the Nuclear Experiments Operation Group, GOEN, and that was a unit of Joint Special Weapons Command. And the test was done on 13th of February 1960 at the Saharan Military Experiment Center near Rajan, French Algeria, in the Sahara Desert. So in this yield, the bomb's yield was actually 70 kilotons, quite large for a first nuclear test. It was an atmospheric nuclear test, and the test altitude was of roughly about 100 meters above ground. So it's an airburst nuclear weapons test. And so you can see where nuclear proliferation is going. Certainly, so here is just some footage of USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. Launched in 1954, it is capable of spending months underwater, but only of course, with the complement of crew, they're going to run out of food, so basically roughly 2 months is all they have, a spare room for as far as food and supplies and whatnot, and for but they can go under the ice because they can stay under the ice, and because they don't have to surface. Whereas diesel submarines, they can't go under the ice for very long, not far, because they have to surface every 2 to 3 days. In the Second World War, you had to surface every 12 hours, recharge batteries. Here, of course, you don't need to do that anymore. It's using a nuclear reactor, generating steam for steam turbines, unlimited power. And soon, this would be the development within the Soviet Union as well, because in 1958-59, they're developing their first nuclear attack submarines. And of course, soon after the development, you can see here SS4s there, the Sandel. The development of missiles, the technology, nuclear submarines with unlimited range, they could travel off the coast, carry thermonuclear ballistic missiles, and fire them off of U.S. subs onto Soviet cities. And this is the whole concept of deterrence. If you fire on us, we'll fire on you. But you don't know where my missile submarines are, so don't fire on us. And that's the whole concept of deterrent. And deterrence comes in many forms. You can have deterrence on, your deterring attack. We better not attack him because he could hit and respond against my cities. That's the concept, basic concept of nuclear deterrence. But it's layered. I mean, you launch bombers over our cities to drop nuclear bombs, we can shoot them down. Weapons such as the BCIM-10 Bombard. The Bombard missile was designed as a surface-to-air missile that carried a 7 to 10 kiloton nuclear warhead, which would be a weapon for atmospheric detonation. to on a wider scale, much larger than the Genie nuclear air-to-air missiles. It would be meant to shoot down incoming bombers groups and take them out mid-air with pressure wave over shock waves over and over many miles. Um, the U.S. government pressured Canada into buying these. We wanted, if we were going to get them, we were, and so instead of keeping the Avro Arrow, it was keeping the Avro Arrow or buying the Bombard missiles, which the Americans were pressuring us to do. Um, of course, we wanted, if we were going to get them, we were hoping to get them with a conventional warhead, which they weren't as effective. Um, they were not as accurate as what weapons are today. That's certainly true. In Europe, of course, the Soviets in East Germany and in Poland, and whatnot, they did have more of everything for as tanks, artillery, um, manpower, over 4 to 5 million troops, thousands of tanks. Uh, Mid Cold War, they had 40,000 tanks, and they could onrush us, in the Fulda Gap, and the Berlin Brigade might last a day, 2 days, a week, but it would look like we'd be pushed further back in West Germany as they are trying to solidify and gain ground. We might even be pushed back into France before we can stop the Soviet advance and push them back with reinforcements coming from the States and in Great Britain. But so to make those assurances, to make sure that the Soviets did not continue to push forward, um, if we needed to, the use of tactical nuclear weapons was an option. A last option, but an option if we were being overrun. And one of those answers would be the Honest John. Even Canada, we had them. They were American made, but Canada also was equipped with them at the time, with U.S. nuclear warheads in West Germany. With a W7 warhead, had a yield. Some weapons in development had what they call dial a yield. You could dial up the yield, set it at a certain yield, or dial it down. So from 8 kiloton to 61 kiloton nuclear bomb, which would be um, 15, 20 times as powerful as Hiroshima. Um, the technology, this is what we call a battlefield ballistic missile or a battlefield nuclear weapon. Battlefield nuclear weapons and the designs, they could even go from landmines to short-range ballistic missiles, which you see here, SRBM, and then bigger stuff, medium-range ballistic missiles, and onward. Um, this one here had a range of 3.4 to 15.4 miles. Yes, and the surface ceiling, which means its maximum flight altitude would be 30,000 feet. Um, Maximum speed 2.3. Sorry, Mach. Sorry, Mach 2.3. Um, the MGR1 it's just one of the examples. There was also the Lance, the Thor, and then of course Pershing 1 and Pershing 2 in the 70s and 80s. Um, these designs were meant to stop incoming Soviet troops. Of course, the Soviets could respond with what they call their battlefield ballistic missiles, which are called FROG, front range over ground. There's FROG 1, 2, all the way to FROG 7. And these are ballistic missiles, almost like guided rockets. And those are a shortened version of what would become the Scud design, Scud A, and then Scud B. The Scud missiles have been used in many conflicts, including Gulf War, the Iraq War. You've seen them in games and in different ones. The Scud is a short-range ballistic missile, and it's been used in designs been copied and modified and upgraded by Iran, by North Korea to develop their Nodong weapon system, Shahab ballistic missile system. Um, Shahab for Iran, Nodong for North Korea. Um, Labor missile, North Korea, what they call. Um, these in this with the Soviet Union were designed to carry nuclear warheads, conventional or gas, chemical stuff like VX, sarin, um, unitary high explosive, or a 10 kiloton nuclear warhead. Um, those are the answers to Honest John and Lance, and different weapons of the on the western side. Um, Part of Canada's role, CF 104, of course, entered service in 1962. It was originally designed as a supersonic interceptor aircraft. It was also used as a used primarily for a low-level strike and reconnaissance aircraft by the Royal Canadian Air Force. The eight CAF 104 squadrons were originally stationed in Europe as part of Canada's NATO commitment, including being armed with U.S. nuclear weapons. This was reduced to 6 squadrons in 1967, with a further reduction to 3 squadrons in 1970. Up to 1971, this included a nuclear strike role that would see Canadian aircraft armed with U.S. nuclear weapons. Um, I've seen this aircraft actually at the Calgary Military Museum. I was there and I got to actually sit in one of the aircraft, see the B-28 bomb, nuclear bomb. It's a free fall nuclear weapon with a yield of 70 to 350 kiloton. These were launched from LAR, were on ready alert 24/7, ready to launch, and within moments they'd be flying very fast over West Germany, going into East Germany to drop nuclear bombs on East German and Soviet targets. That's what the mission was. And they could carry the B-57, 5 to 20 kiloton bomb, B-28, or B-43 bomb, which had a yield of 1 megatons, which is 50 to 60 times more powerful than bomb dropped in Hiroshima. That's one bomb. Um, Remember, hydrogen bombs are limitless in design, in power, and a B-43 can take out an entire city very easily. Meant to take out air bases, air defense units, command and control, and they were prepared to target command and control and enemy targets in um, East Germany and its Soviet-controlled territory. Within moments, they were ready. So, and a lot of people don't know this, Canada played a critical role in defense of West Germany, even with armed with U.S. nukes, with Canadian planes. So the B-28, which I did see there was one there that I actually um, got to see. It was a deactivated bomb. Actually, it was probably a remake of the actual bomb itself. Um, so of course it was carried by U.S. tactical fighters, aircraft, bomber aircraft from up until 1972 under NATO nuclear weapons program. American B-28s were equipped with six. They also equipped six Europe-based Canadian CF-104 squadrons, known as the RCAF Nuclear Strike Force. We actually had it in our Royal Canadian Air Force Nuclear Strike Force. And if people that don't know that, I mean, you can read up online. LAR and then the two bases that I mentioned earlier in this in part 2 of the presentation. I mentioned those two bases, LAR being one of them. These squadrons um, were equipped with them and they're ready to launch within a few months. It was also supplied for delivered by U.S. based or UK based Royal Air Force Valiant and Canberra aircraft as well. It is additional U.S. Navy based fighter aircraft, attack aircraft, A3D, A3B, Sky Warrior, Sky A4 Skyhawks, and Vigilante A4A Vigilante fighters. Uh, they're also equipped to carry the Mark 28. Um, so different yields, the variable yields, 1.1 megaton, 350 kiloton, 70 kiloton. Yield 4 is a fission weapon, may have been a different design, different warhead, a smaller yield, or yield 5 was 1.45 megatons. The thing about it, in 1969, the United States had 41,000 nuclear weapons in its inventory. The Soviets were a bit behind at maybe at 29,000, give or take. 4,500 B-28s were produced at the Pantex plant and plants in central United States and from Los Alamos and onward. Uh, the last weapons in use were retired in 1991, and that was the year that the Soviet Union disintegrated. This is how the Canadian Nuclear Strike Force worked. You're pushing up to almost maximum military power, up to 540 knots, at 200 feet off the ground. And so, and then you're pushing up to, from 450 knots at 200 AGL and then 540 knots. Mandatory checkpoint, confirm navigation accuracy for timing and location, the MCP. TRP, timer reference point weapon release timers activated for the Mark 28s. Speed up to Mach 0.85. And then your pup point is your pull-up point. You're feeling that 3 Gs as a lot of your blood is you're pulling up on the yoke, the stick. And you're pulling up and you're feeling the blood going down to your feet. And that's at a 3G 45-degree climb up. So, and as you release the bomb, because you're going at high speed, you release the bomb with a drag parachute, and the B-28 it drops as a free fall nuclear weapon. So it as it's released, the weapon's released, it drops. It comes out with a parachute so that it can drop down to the target, and the aircraft can get away in time. And the aircraft that's with a variable yield, it depends. Your aircraft has to escape the shock wave, because if you're within range of the shock wave, it's going to rip your aircraft apart. So the drag parachute, usually it's a Kevlar parachute, and it stabilizes the weapon. And of course you're climbing at a 45-degree angle, and you would at high speed, and then you eject, you drop the weapon, pickle the weapon, what we call, and it's so, and then as you drop as it drops down, it's going to go vertical and drop vertical down 100 feet second or so. And of course, the CF-104 delivery aircraft escaped the path. Of course, the aircraft rolls inverted and dives toward the surface after it's dropped. So the bomb's coming up, and then it's dropping down vertical, and then you're going at full power, afterburner, driving back down to 200 feet off the ground at high speed in another direction. And that delivery aircraft is escaping the path of the detonation. And that detonates moments later. It's what they call low altitude drag delivery, or LAD. And that's what the air crew and the pilots of the CF-104s and the nuclear delivery program were able to do. And that this is all would take place in minutes. And Soviets would respond, and nuclear weapons would be going off back and forth, missiles and whatnot. Millions would be dying within even a tactical nuclear war in Europe. Millions would be dead within a number of hours, because the radiation in even cities would be hit, even if it was not directly wanted. If they were just directing at military targets, cities unfortunately would be hit nonetheless. Um, and this would be the start of what could be the end of the world. So here we have the Voodoo, the CF-101, doing a weapons test with a warhead, W-25 warhead. So Genie or Falcon air-to-air missile. This is a B-28 bomb being deployed in a laydown tactic, a test of a bomb, of a different type of B-28 bomb dropped from a B-52. And this is in the 1980s. Laydown is another tactic where you're coming in low, you're coming in from a higher altitude, you're angling down, and you release a bomb, and you get out of there very quickly. And that is so in the video there you saw the laydown is that was a B-28 FI. Fuse enhanced. I'm trying to remember what. So that's a different design of the bomb. There's different variants of that type of weapon. And then there is this one, of course, the ones that our fighters carried in the nuclear strike force was the Mark 28 RE, retarded extended. So it's dropped with parachute, and it has a yield of roughly about 70 kilotons. So that's about 10, 15 times, 25, even 25, 30, 25 to 30 times the power of Hiroshima, give or take. The equivalency of one of those bombs is enough to take out most of a small city. The B-57 is another bomb that is capable of being carried by Canadian aircraft as well as American aircraft. It is carried by different yields, a smaller 5, 10 to 20, 15, 20 kiloton yield. So this is some of what the what Canadian and American aircraft call another airdrop retarded bomb. So here you have of course, the CF-101 Voodoo, armed with the Air-2A Genie air-to-air unguided nuclear rocket air-to-air missile. There was significant political controversy in Canada about their adoption to carry them, but they were meant to shoot down Soviet bombers. So this is how they were carried, and this is what they look like. They carry like a 1 kiloton nuclear warhead, 1 to 2 kiloton, very low yield. And the issue of nuclear weapons in Canada, of course, many people had issues with it, had not been resolved in June 1961 even. Thus, the CF-101s were armed only with their secondary weapon, now the AIM-4D Falcon missiles. In April 1963, the issue led to the collapse of the Diefenbaker government. And Diefenbaker was certainly involved with the unfortunate removal of the Avro Aero program. The succeeding Pearson government signed an agreement with the United States concerning nuclear arms for Canada on the 16th of August 1963. Here's the arrow again. The agreement did not actually state that Canada had acquired nuclear weapons. The Canadian government usually refused to confirm or deny that there were any nuclear arms in Canada. The agreement specifically stated that the heir to Genie rockets were the property of the United States and would only be released to Canada for actual use with the joint agreement of Canada and the United States through NORAD. So, and that's the agreement there. These weapons are there and they're ready.
By the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and cover, ducked and cover. He did what we all...
So this is a cartoon, Bert the Turtle, 1951. This is, of course, civil defense became a major aspect of life in Canada and the United States. This life meant looking at protecting yourself in case of a nuclear attack. That means sometimes building bunkers, underground shelters, and knowing what to do if there's an incoming nuclear attack. A lot of the school kids would be told to duck and cover under their desks. And this was a TV ad that was put out called Duck and Cover. And this was to teach kids and whatnot about ducking and covering in case of a nuclear attack. And as you can see here, once they're told get underneath their desk, you're trying to protect yourself from flash blindness, debris, and whatnot. But in a direct nuclear hit, as Mr. Fletcher likes to put it, one of my good friends, in a direct hit, you can sit there and then kiss your ass goodbye because you're going to be vaporized within seconds, milliseconds, maybe even. People would be running off the street to go into shelters. This actually in the Soviet Union was taken far even more seriously. They had bunkers, vast underground shelters underneath Moscow to go for the entire half the city, to go underground and live in case of a direct attack. Because society was so controlled, even in the Khrushchev era, the readiness for that was ever apparent. The mistrust between East and West was certainly continuing onward. So the need to duck and cover was ever more apparent in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So because Khrushchev finally took power, and then of course, and then helped his friend Fidel Castro take power in Cuba, which defeated, finally overthrew Batista, an American puppet but a tyrant. This revolutionary, Fidel Castro, takes power in Cuba. And of course, with his friend, of course, Khrushchev, and then so the communists take over, communist Cuba. Khrushchev has taken over in mid-50s over a power struggle between Soviet leaders. Finally, Khrushchev, being energetic, boasting of nuclear power, boisterous and energetic, Khrushchev knows that nuclear weapons, he's behind in the missile race. He doesn't have enough missiles. He has maybe 4 missiles, ICBMs that can reach the States at that given time, but the rest of them are bombers. A number of medium-range missiles in Europe, Eastern Europe. But now he wants to even the scale. So he brings over secretly SS4 medium-range ballistic missiles and then SS5 skin medium-range ballistic IR intermediate range ballistic missiles. First of much being to have a range of 3,000 miles, all the way up through Washington D.C. and being able to hit most of the strategic air command bases. Being able to wipe out millions of Americans within 6 minutes. That alone a first gives the Soviet Union a major first strike basis in Cuba. Bring in 3 megaton warheads with these missiles. Cuba was going to be a nuclear launch pad. So, of course, the U-2 spy planes fly over, and the U-2s discover these missiles in Cuba, and of course, America creates a blockade of Cuba, which you see here. This blockade is meant to stop Soviet freighters, which you see here, from bringing in more of these missiles. Soviet submarines are in the area as well, maybe armed with nuclear armed torpedoes. They try to force one of them to the surface. Um, they are, luckily, of course, the captain is ready. Of course, the captain does not want to order a nuclear torpedo attack against the U.S. Navy, but of course, in a sense, he's being pushed to do so by his political officers because he's being, of course, they were being harassed by American forces because they were in the area. Um, the blockade didn't work. It almost led to full armed conflict. Um, of course, U.S. nuclear forces are under what we call the Defcon system, the Defense Condition System. Okay, so Defcon 5 is full peacetime. That's what we are right now. Defcon 4 is heightened alert. Defcon 3, they were ordered to go to Defcon 3 first, and which is very high alert within minutes of launch, being ready to launch within minutes, in which a lot of forces are ready. And bombers are poised to drop nuclear weapons on Cuba, literally destroy Cuba. Um, of course, this is a big gamble, the biggest gamble for Khrushchev. And this could have led to full-scale thermonuclear war, leading to hundreds of millions of dead. But it didn't. Finally, Khrushchev, I mean, first he had the SS-4s there. Then later on, he brings in the SS-5, which can reach all the way to Seattle. And within minutes, millions of Americans be dead, right? So, um, so the pressure is on Khrushchev. Finally, they strike a deal with the Americans. We will remove our obsolete Jupiter missiles, theater range ballistic missiles, which are obsolete. We will remove those missiles from Turkey, which there are bases at Turkey. And them being obsolete, finally they strike a deal. And Khrushchev capitulates, says, okay, we'll remove the missiles. And then, so they knew that if they hadn't removed in that 13 days, if they hadn't removed the missiles by Monday, they would have launched a nuclear strike on Cuba, and then war would have broken out in Europe, and a full-scale nuclear war with the Soviet Union would have ensued. Such a thing would happen very quickly, very destructively, and millions would have been dead within hours, minutes, and bombers would have been launched on both sides. The closest we ever were in the crisis is, of course, the generals, without permission of Kennedy. Kennedy is a new president. Kennedy is a man who's energetic, and yes, he's very well liked. JFK is a rock star as far as they're concerned, and during this whole conflict, he orders them to stay at DEFCON 3. I believe it was Curtis LeMay and some of the top generals ordered Strategic Air Command and the nuclear forces to DEFCON 2. The only other level in DEFCON 2 is at their closest point. They were minutes away from launching strikes. Nothing could compare. Nothing could compare to any other time almost in history from that point forward, you could see um, the strategic air command bombers, fighters ready to, and poised to attack within, and of course, the only other, at DEFCON 1 is war. DEFCON 1, fire, go. That's what it was. And so you can see here, MRBM sites for SS4 Sandals, um, going away IRBM sites for the SS5s, and they at the time they had, of course, there were 6 MRBM SS4 Sandal sites and 3 SS5 sites. SA2 guideline surface-to-air missiles, which were capable of even shooting down U-2 spy planes, which what they had done a couple of years earlier in the Soviet Union with Gary Powers. They were able to, it shows they were able to target aircraft even at 50,000 feet. Um, so the readiness of these sites and able to launch, it goes to show you how tense the situation was for Kennedy and for Khrushchev as well as Fidel Castro. Um, at the time, of course, Fidel Castro acknowledged that there were up to 200 and even up to 290 nuclear warheads on Cuba at that moment, at any given moment. And so the Soviet military buildup in Cuba in October of '62. This is just a map of where the missiles were, and this is the range this is the capital Havana, and this is the range of the missiles. SS5s had a range all the way up to Seattle, even Los Angeles, most of the U.S. So definitely up to 2,000. So here's your 2,000, 3,000 mile range. And within minutes, you could have Washington. 6 minutes, you can have a 3 megaton warhead dropped on Washington D.C. Um, and these missiles take days to prepare for develop. They're mobile, transported, but they are fixed launch sites. It's not like missiles of today that are mobile, erect, and then launch. It's there's the liquid fueled, and they have to be fueled before they launch, and there were days, and that Monday, the 13th day, they were prepared to launch. They were getting prepared to launch, but luckily, the negotiations succeeded. Here's the SS4 on one of the Victory May Day parades. That's the SS4 Sandals, that same design, same ones that were brought to Cuba. Take a number of days they're erected on a launch pad, or they could be silo launched as well. They were prepared for surface launch in Cuba, or they could be silo launched in certain places in the Soviet Union. This here, that's of course the 3 megaton warhead, chromatic warhead separator, and that's here. Oxidizer tank for fuel. Instrument section, that's 4 here. 5, oxidizer feed line here. Fuel tank, and that's 6, that's here. 7, Toxidol compressed air tank. Throw it out. Hydrogen peroxide is the fuel, and 9 is here's the turbo pump, and then hydrogen peroxide is part of it. Yeah, and of course oxidizer, sustainer combustion chamber, and tails, and of course here you have your tail section and your engine graphite jet vane, and so that's part of the design of the rocket. Here's the longer range SS5 skin. Carry a maybe even a larger warhead, at at least 3 megatons, longer range. So the SS4 has a range of 1,000 miles, but of course the the SS5 is a 3,000 mile range, and so yeah, um, we'll have to talk about. So if I mixed them up, sorry. Um, so range of 1,000 miles for the SS4, range of 3,000 for the SS5, and easy to mix up because they're both involved in the same incident. Um, to the Soviet calculation, it's 2,800 mile range. The Americans say it's less, but of course, and these with longer range missiles, sometimes a smaller warhead they would carry 1 megaton. With a with a larger warhead, it would be 2.2 megaton. So roughly difference in yield and variations. With a two megaton warhead or a 3 megaton warhead, the main difference is that it's larger yield, blast range, and so even with a 2 megaton warhead in 6 minutes, an SS4 would devastate any city nonetheless. So here is an example of the SS5 scan. Um, and so as it's lifting off, you can see here, this is just a video, a Russian video of a test here, a missile test. Weapons today, now we have developed ballistic missile defense, missiles that can travel faster, missiles that can defeat with multiple nuclear warheads that can evade missile defense, and so on and so forth. The technology has considerably enhanced, um, as well as underwater development of submarine launched ballistic missiles that I've mentioned. And so, yeah. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Aaron Boma, military specialist for Carleton County.